You felt it before. That silent need to turn off the phone, ignore messages, and just being alone. We all crave solitude from time to time. But what happens when that loneliness never ends? What if the days of silence became weeks and weeks and months total social isolation? Most of people believe that the greatest danger is the loneliness, but according to Carl Jung, one of the brightest psychologists and controversial in history, that is not known is not at all close to reality. Jung made a terrifying discovery. When the brain is deprived of everything, human contact not only saddens, but rather initiates a transformation radical and dangerous. Jung argued that true isolation forces an inevitable encounter with your shadow, all the dark, repressed, and denied by your own mind. It is a process so powerful that it can destroy your sense of reality, overwhelm your reasoning ability, and take you to on the verge of madness. In this video, we will follow Jung's roadmap about what happens to the psyche human when disconnected from the world. We will explore how brain energy heads inland, triggering a descent into a dark night of the soul. We will see how this trip can destabilize the structures themselves of rational thought, causing psychosis, hallucinations, and delusions. But we will also discover the most important idea Jung's deep, that if you manage to survive this terrifying descent, you will find a secret to a deep self-discovery and a life more authentic than you ever imagined possible. So what really happens when you're left completely alone with your mind? The answer is much more extreme than you imagine. Let's get started. Social isolation, it starts the moment you stop answering the phone. It's that rejection deliberate to social interactions, the conscious decision to live in isolation instead of facing another conversation superficial. But what you may not know is that this social isolation, this disconnection, intentional from the outside world, triggers something much deeper than simple loneliness. Your brain deprived of their usual social interactions and from active external validation of immediately what Carl Jung called the reversal of psychic energy. Where your thoughts once flowed towards others, now they head towards the interior with an intensity surprising. This is not just loneliness, that painful state that Jung distinguished as the inability to communicate what you seems important. It is something more dangerous and potentially transformative. After days of prolonged isolation, your perceptions begin to change. The defense mechanisms that normally they protect your ego from the truths uncomfortable begin to weaken. Without constant feedback the barriers carefully built between your conscious mind and your unconscious begins to dissolve. Your thoughts become unfiltered, raw, and often terrifying. Jung observed that isolation acts as a powerful catalyst, forcing what he called a meeting directly with the same structures psychic against which the mind conscious is designed to defend itself. The brain, suddenly devoid of external stimulation and social validation, draws energy towards the interior with such force that the material latent psychological emerges to the awareness. This is where social withdrawal reveals its true nature, not as a simple evasion, but as an archetypal descent into the depths of the psyche itself, with a true work of self-discovery. Jung revolutionized our understanding of what happens when isolation social deepens into a genuine loneliness. Unlike his contemporary Sigmund Freud, Jung saw this isolation is not a regression pathological, but as the essential crucible for individuation, the process of becoming a complete and undivided individual. The loneliness, wrote Jung, is the highest and most decisive experience for self-discovery. But what does Carl Jung understand? Exactly because of loneliness? It's not about not just from being alone, but from actively connect with the world interior when distractions, external ones disappear. Thoughts, no longer being filtered by social expectations, nor by the need to maintain an acceptable communication, begins to reveal their true nature. Jung he observed that this creates what he called a psychic void that attracts content unconscious directly to the awareness. This is where things get tough, fascinating. The limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, interprets this loneliness as a threat and opportunity at a time. Primitive alarm systems are activated by flooding you with impulses that seem strange and overwhelming. Without, however, Jung discovered that simultaneously this same activation allows access what he called the unconscious collective, the deepest layers of the psyche that contain patterns universals of human experience. In solitude, your internal communication changes drastically. Instead of the constant chatter of the social interaction, you start what Jung called active imagination, a dialogue with the autonomous figures of your unconscious. They are not hallucinations, but encounters with the deepest structures of the personality that normally remain hidden. Carl Jung understood that this process, although essential for the psychological growth, entails immense risk. That is why the descent into unconscious territory often manifests itself as the same depression and anxiety that we will explore continuation. Depression arises as the inevitable companion of loneliness, Jung, but not in the way you expected. This depression, what Jung called a forced necessary anchoring, arises as the response of the psyche to encountering material that the conscious mind has spent years repressing. It's not a dysfunction. It's a sign of that the deepest work has started. As the activation Carl Jung's unconsciousness intensifies, anxiety floods your system with an overwhelming intensity. This anxiety represents the terror of your ego to lose control. His attempt, desperate, to maintain the patterns relatives that loneliness has begun to dissolve. Your nervous system becomes hyperactive, interpreting every shadow, every unexpected thought, every emerging momentum as a threat potential to your identity carefully built. The obsessions that arise during this phase are not random intrusions, but messages from the unconscious that demand attention to aspects of oneself that have long denied. Jung observed that these obsessions tend to focus on mortality issues, meaning and authenticity. The idea, suicidal, when it arises reflects what Jung called it ego death, not a death literal, but psychological dissolution of false identities. This is where stress worsens exponentially. Your body, already overloaded by the insulation, now load-bearing additional information, processing intense psychological, without social support habitual. Fear becomes your companion constant, not just fear of threats external, but existential fear of what that you are discovering about yourself. Jung's revolutionary intuition was that this depression fulfills a function crucial. Give back to the people who have become too high and distant in the sphere above the humiliating reality of his humanity. The darkness, it is not a punishment, but a preparation for the integration work that must be done continue. However, this descent towards depression and anxiety creates a dangerous territory where the rational thinking begins to fragment, setting the stage for even more cognitive impairment severe. The prefrontal cortex, the center brain executive, responsible for the rational thinking and decision-making decisions, begins to give in to the psychological pressure of isolation prolonged. This region, which normally maintains the reasoning ability and controls the emotional impulses, is overwhelmed by the avalanche of unconscious material that Jung's loneliness has unleashed. As depression and anxiety intensify from the previous phase, the prefrontal cortex loses control on cognitive processing. The reasoning that previously helped to making complex decisions becomes confusing and unreliable. Jung noted that this cognitive collapse is not accidental. They are the structured defenses of the ego, those who finally give up truths, deeper, psychological ones. Your moral judgment, generally anchored in social conditioning and analysis rational, begins to change drastically. The ethical frameworks in which you have based begin to dissolve as that personality, the term that Jung used to refer to your mask social, collapses. Without the external social validation that reinforce these moral structures, your prefrontal cortex struggles to maintain a coherent ethical reasoning. During at this stage, memory becomes increasingly more unstable. Cognitive resources, usually dedicated to memory clear, they're now overwhelmed by the content-intensive processing emotional of the unconscious. The capacity to distinguish between experiences past and present weakens as that the archetypal material floods the awareness. This deterioration of rationality represents what Jung called defeat necessary of the ego, the inability of the rational mind to contain or control the vast territories of the psyche that finds true solitude. The prefrontal cortex, despite its sophisticated cognitive abilities, simply cannot process the symbolic and nonlinear language of unconscious. As the reasoning, moral judgment, and memory continues to fragment, the stage is set for even more extreme demonstrations. The total collapse of consensual reality through hallucinations and delusions. The social isolation reaches its extreme, more dangerous, when the collapse of the prefrontal cortex gives way to a total distortion of reality. This is not as gradual, but rather crosses suddenly a psychological threshold where isolation turns into loneliness therapeutic to a pathological disconnection of the consensual reality. At this stage, health deteriorates quickly, since the physical body supports the accumulated load of weeks or months without significant human contact. The stress hormones that have been flooding the system from the start of this process now cause havoc in immune function, health cardiovascular, and stability neurological. Insomnia becomes your constant torment, creating a vicious circle that accelerates psychological collapse. The lack of sleep aggravates all the other symptoms. Your reasoning is already fragmented, is even more affected. The regulation emotional disappears completely, and the border between dream consciousness and waking consciousness fades. During this phase, the perception of the time is distorted until it becomes unrecognizable. Minutes seem like hours, days seem like merge with the nights, and the stopwatch internal, usually synchronized by social interactions and routines external, loses all calibration. Jung warned that without the anchoring effect of consensual reality, the psyche disconnected from linear time. Here it is where hallucinations arise, not as random neurological failures, but as the attempt of the unconscious to create the social contact that the social isolation has eliminated. You start seeing people who aren't there, presents, to hear conversations in empty rooms, to feel the contact with ghostly presences. Delusions follow closely behind hallucinations, since the mind constructs elaborated explanatory frameworks for these impossible experiences. Jung observed that these delusions often contain a profound symbolic truth, but without adequate containment, represent the complete assimilation of ego on the part of the unconscious, which he called psychic fragmentation. Without, however, even at this extreme, Jung believed that redemption was still possible through restoration, deliberate human connection, authentic. Socialization becomes the ultimate test to determine if the experience of isolation has led to a genuine transformation or to a pathological withdrawal. This return to human connection, which Jung called the hero's mandate, determines whether the deep work interior of social withdrawal will give fruits in authentic relationships, or if it will remain trapped in self-centeredness, narcissistic. The quality of your social interactions after prolonged isolation reveals all about the success of your descent psychological. If you have fully integrated the material of shadow and unconscious content that emerged during loneliness, your communication is transformed from one need based on the projection to an authentic expression rooted in the fullness. You no longer seek validation from others because you have found a source interior of meaning through the connection with the being. Your thoughts, previously fragmented by isolation and overwhelmed by unconscious material, now flow with clarity and purpose during social gatherings. The perceptions that were distorted during extreme isolation gradually recalibrate through a healthy social feedback and a consensual assessment of reality. It's not about going back to your old one's patterns, but to forge forms of have completely new relationships. Jung observed that authentic socialization after the work of individuation creates which he called a prosperous company, when each individual remembers his individuality. You no longer search desperately fullness through others, nor you unconsciously project your qualities rejected in friends and couples. The connection with the community is makes possible precisely because you have learned to be genuinely alone. The great paradox that Jung discovered is that only by bravely embracing the loneliness we could develop the capacity for more social interactions deep. After finding you in the depths from isolation, now you can know truly to another person such as is, not as you need it to be. Social withdrawal, when managed with awareness and courage, is transformed from crisis to call, the decline necessary that allows a promotion authentic towards a human connection genuine. So we have traveled from a simple door, closed to the limits same of the human psyche, and back we have seen that according to Carl Jung, the complete social isolation is not a passive state of solitude, is a process active, powerful, and dangerous. It begins with mental energy turning towards the interior, forcing a confrontation with our shadow. This descent can lead to depression and anxiety, overwhelming, challenge the very limits of our rational thinking, and even risk a total break with the reality that leads to psychosis. Without, however, as Jung so proposed brilliantly, this is not just a path to destruction, is the crucible of individuation, the hero's journey. If it is traversed with courage, it allows us return to the world not broken, but transformed, capable of greater connection, authentic than ever. The paradox fundamental is that only by learning truly to be alone, we can finally learn to be genuinely with others. What do you think about the Jung's challenging idea that we should face our inner darkness to achieve fulfillment? Share your perspective in the comments. I would love to know. If this exploration of the mind was helpful, please give a rating this video and subscribe. Visit our channel to delve deeper into psychology and philosophy. Don't forget to visit the campanile notification so you don't miss out our next video. Thanks for watching.